Welcome to Conquering Your Clownfish, a podcast dedicated to transforming disabilities into special abilities. I'm your host, Brady Murray. Welcome to Conquering Your Clownfish. I am thrilled to present our special guest today, Rachel Morris. She is a dedicated advocate for Down syndrome and pediatric cancer, and most importantly, she is the mother of Rosie. Rosie was born in April of 2023, and Rachel discovered shortly after her birth that Rosie has Down syndrome. Just 3 weeks later, they learned that Rosie had a rare form of cancer developing behind her ear. After undergoing 4 rounds of chemotherapy, Rosie triumphed over cancer and has remained cancer-free since. Rachel shares that Rosie has transformed their entire world and improved the way they live for the better. So, Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I really enjoyed just the few minutes that we had before we started recording, just to visit a little bit more about your journey. I would say this is a journey that we are recording in real time. I mean, April of 2023, Rosie's birth was not very long ago, and I reflect back on Nash when he was born, and the following months and even years after his birth, it was still a very raw emotion. And so I'm excited to record a podcast in real time.
Me too. It does feel like it doesn't feel like time really passes from that moment. I don't know. It feels very much like it was just yesterday that our whole world just changed.
Most definitely. Rachel, let's start by having you share about your family.
Yeah. So actually, I feel like our journey kind of starts when we moved to Utah. So we just felt this pull to come to Utah. Neither of us are from here. We have no connections. It would have never really been on our radar. I can't explain it. There's no reason for it. We just felt ready to make a move like this. So we left what we would have considered home, Chicago. We'd been there for 7 years. We had both of our girls there. We were very much established. We had really great community. It was a wonderful place for us. And we came to Utah. And the same week that we moved to Utah, I found out I was actually pregnant with our 3rd child. So then we proceed to go through 9 months of a very long pregnancy. I was really sick through most of it, and also just really homesick too. So weeks before Rosie was born, I kept telling my girls, we're almost there. We're almost there. We're going to get to this finish line, right? Of just mom not feeling good, and it'll all go back to normal real soon. That's kind of was the conversation. And then Rosie was born, and we realized at that time that she had Down syndrome and that we were now on a very different life path than we'd ever imagined for ourselves. And we were in the NICU for about 10 days, and then we came home thinking she was, clean bill of health, and we were just really grateful for that we didn't have any major concerns with her heart. And we just kept thinking, well, we're just so lucky that at least we're not having to deal with anything medical right now. And then within 10 days of being home, her eye started to enlarge. And so we just started this journey. We thought it was something, and we were treating it for something else, and it just ended up being something really big. It was cancer, and that put us on the cancer journey. And then me and the girls had to move up to Salt Lake, go to Primary Children's, and do the whole thing postpartum. And my husband was down south trying to work, and we were trying to balance it all. And we got through that, and then we got back home, and then we decided to actually again within state. So that is the 2-year window of just, these life events that feel like one of them alone is more than enough on a plate. Yeah. So it has just felt.
I want to try and unpack that a little bit because, a move to a new state to where you literally don't know anybody, and you're moving a young family. Obviously your husband is working and probably very engaged with work, because that oftentimes is a heavy lift just from a professional standpoint. And then you find out that you're expecting, and it's a difficult pregnancy. And so just that alone of the homesickness that comes, missing the life that you knew in Chicago and trying to adapt to a new environment is a lot. And then after you think what is the finish line and the start of easy sailing, you actually hit the hardest part of the journey, and that is a dual diagnosis. I mean, it's a Down syndrome diagnosis and then a cancer diagnosis. Rachel, that's a lot.
Yes. Yes, and actually, you mentioned my husband's job. There was actually a lot going on behind the scenes there too, with shifting and us trying to navigate actually a lot of his work stuff and trying to decide what we wanted. And yeah, it was so much happening all at the same time. We just felt like by the time the cancer diagnosis came, we got to the point where we're like, you just kind of let go. And you're like, we don't have any control here. So we're just hanging on. And that's just what you do. You just hang on and hope that the hits stop coming so you can get your feet under you. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Down syndrome diagnosis. Had you had any exposure to Down syndrome before? How was that for you?
Yeah. I did actually. I had a really good friend in high school who had Down syndrome, who was very attached to me. She was somebody that I engaged with her mostly throughout the summertime. We would have overlapping activities and events where we would be like kind of in the same youth group, basically. And so I actually feel like I had probably more exposure and experience within the Down syndrome community than a lot of people. And my mom was really good about encouraging us to be inclusive. So we also had friends who were on the spectrum growing up and just, different types of intellectual disabilities. We would have them in our home and we would invite them to movie nights and we would go to birthday parties. And so I did have a good background in that. And that in a way backfired on me, I think. I think that is where my eyes were very much opened immediately to ideas that actually were not the healthiest probably surrounding the disability community that I didn't realize I had, right? Like thinking, oh, I'm like a nice, kind person and realizing, oh, I have some adjusting to do here. I need to shift some of these thought processes. That was very
Tell me more
eye-opening.
about that. Do you have an example?
I think the best way to phrase this, which is probably going to make me sound like a horrible person, is I think I thought I was doing a service to people with a disability by being their friend. I was being a kind person. I was being a good Christian. It was making like me feel better. I would never have thought or said that consciously, but I realized it when I had Rosie, and my heart was so broken thinking she's not going to have real friends. She's going to have people that are doing service for her, is what I was like thinking. And it made me just realize maybe my intentions and my depth of understanding of what I was receiving back in those relationships was limited. And a lot of that was just youth, right? Like I was young, but also just maybe not being educated and aware. I didn't know. I was doing the best I could with the knowledge that I had. So it was just an incredibly eye-opening experience. So I think that's part of why it is so important to me that when I advocate for Rosie, I want it to be very clear that her circle and the people that are close to her are going to be people who value and understand what she's giving to them as much as what they're giving to her. That's important.
I think that's great insight, and thank you for being just so transparent with that, because we've all been there, and whether that's in a disability or in other service type of focus, whether that's in a church or a school or whatever it may be, I think the intention is correct, or at least the idea of the intention is correct, but oftentimes it's maybe not with the purest of motives, or our hearts aren't as open as they could be to really receiving the gift that we are serving, right? And so that is quite transparent and actually super insightful.
Yeah.
So you're reeling with the Down syndrome diagnosis, I imagine. In fact, maybe let me ask that. Was that emotional, or was that more of like, hey, I got this. I have a best friend. Like, we got this. How was that for you?
I immediately reached out to my doula, who is a therapist, and she immediately reached out to the therapy community and found me a list of people who had experience either with their own children within the Down syndrome community or disability community, and gave me a list of therapists that I could reach out to. And I had a therapist like that. Like, that's how I was handling it. I knew that I was very heartbroken. I was very uneducated. I was very ignorant in what it meant to be a mother in those shoes. And I was really sad for my life. And I know how selfish that sounds, but that's just the honest truth of it. I was nervous to feel like I was potentially a caretaker for the rest of my life. How do I outlive my child? Like, those types of thoughts. And then that shifted after that shock started to wear off. Then that did start to shift into worry for Rosie. And like, wait, but how does this actually impact her? And so the best way I describe it, especially on my page, is like there was a severe detachment from my child. It was probably the most painful part of it all, was having this baby that I've never experienced that in motherhood. I know some moms go through that in typical situations, kind of a detachment period. I've always been really attached to my children. I've always, I homeschool, I keep my kids close, I'm very involved. I try to be as connected to them as possible. And so it was like my world split. And I had these two older daughters that I was feeling like I had to protect from this baby that felt like a threat to our family. And that's just what my brain did. And I had to work really hard through that. I would say that the hardest period of time of that took about 4 solid months to come through that. And that was through the cancer. So I'm fighting for a child to live that still angry is existing in the way that she's existing. It was a very complex place to be. It was a very confusing. I didn't know which way was up through any of it.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for being so just transparent and vulnerable in describing this, because that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, you're 4 months into this, but Rosie's cancer diagnosis came 3 weeks after she was born.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're dealing with the loss and the heartache and just that sincere feeling inside of having a child that has Down syndrome while fighting for this child's life. I understand what you say now, especially with you got to a place where you truly had to just let go. Maybe you can share more about what that was like and how you worked through that.
So the cancer part of it, first I'll say this. The thing that I feared the most with the Down syndrome diagnosis was that it was going to take over my life and I would lose my relationship with my other two. I wouldn't be able to continue to show up and support them the way that I had. And then that fear came true immediately, because I honestly have yet to figure out how to help another family outside of the pediatric cancer world understand what that looks like. But it is the most intense, physically demanding thing I've ever experienced in my life. I would go, I do have a brother here. So I do have one family member here, but he was an hour south with my husband. Luckily, I had a sister who basically maneuvered her whole life around her husband. My parents helped on that end, and she came and stayed with me for the summer. And we did it together, and we just kind of balanced her baby and then Rosie and my girls through all of this. And she came with me to the hospital one time, and it was at the hospital she realized, she was like, I had no idea what you were going through at the hospital, because there were so many meetings and appointments. There were probably 15 to 20 different, like groups of people, sections of the hospital that were on Rosie, because she was such a complicated case. They'd never seen her before, this type of a case. It's such a rare case. There's like 15 documented cases of the type of cancer that landed behind her eye. So, and it's like a learning hospital. So there's just like teams with doctors and like all of this, the people down. So I would just have like a flood of people coming into my room all day, every day. And I'm like trying to pump and nurse and postpartum and take care of Rosie, and her eye looks like it's going to fall out of her head. And then I've got the 2 little girls at home that are stressed out because I'm no longer there and they're not used to that. So there were just so many balls to juggle, and I couldn't do it all. And honestly, the thing that happened in this situation is it was so intense that my body went into such fight or flight. I basically just had to stay in that like adrenaline space and stay very present in the moment, because if I thought about the trauma of the birth and my previous life that I was now grieving, it would drown me. And if I thought about the future and what it was like going to be like as Rosie got older, that was going to drown me. So I very much stayed very present. I would take lots of breaths and I would remind myself, right now we're safe. That was the thing I said to myself the most often. Would like close my eyes and I would remind myself, okay, I have a child that has cancer. She has a disability. My 2 children are at home, but we're all safe. Like currently, she's safe. The doctors have her. My other girls, they're safe. My husband's just doing his job. He's safe. I'm safe. We're all safe. And I just would lean into that all day, every day, every moment. And it was just like second by second. That's all I could do.
Wow. Rachel, was there a turning point or a moment that you saw a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah. So in her 4th round of chemotherapy, and basically what my day looks like at this point is I wake up 7 a.m., take care of the girls, pop to the hospital. I could go on too, especially about like all of the help we had. We can get into that later, but I had so much help coming in from the community, that strangers that I didn't know. But I'm basically popping back and forth between hospital and home, hospital and home. I had to do like 2.5 hours with Rosie, 2.5 hours with my girls. And like, I just going back and forth, trying to pump, and keep my milk supply up because I'm worried about, Rosie having that immune support. So that's basically what my day is, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And in the 4th round, we're kind of getting into a groove of what this looks like. It's basically just go, go, go nonstop from, 6:30 till midnight, till we can just get through all the things of the day. And I just remember in the 4th round, I sit down with Rosie at the hospital. It's a quiet moment, and I held her close to me. I have it on video, and I held her close to me, and it was the first time since she'd been born that I held her, and I felt the motherly instinct to protect her the way I would with my other kids. And I felt this connection and just this joy of she's my child and she's beautiful and I'm adore her. And I'm so grateful that she's okay. And at this point in time, I was feeling confident that she was going to beat the cancer. And I was it just kind of hit me that it was the first moment of peace that I had. It was very brief, but there was nothing other than just that feeling you should feel when you hold your child for the first time. And all the darkness and all the fears were not there. And that was the first time it happened. It was during her 4th round of chemotherapy. So that would have been about July, end of July maybe, I think. And she was born in April. Yeah, 3 or 4 months in. Yeah.
That's a beautiful image. And I actually can just feel what you were feeling as you were describing that and that connection that comes with that child. Mm-hmm. And that's a very beautiful thing. I'd love to hear about what's next because the 4th round of chemo, that was the ticket. And so she was able to overcome cancer and you receive a diagnosis of cancer-free. And so share with us from that point forward what that has been like.
So we go home. My sister was still with me, but at this point in time, I had yet to be alone as Rosie's mom. And my husband, I think, was nervous for me to be alone. I was nervous to be alone. It just felt like this is more than a human typically should be carrying in life, especially alone. And so we went and we were able to get some help just to come in 2 or 3 days of the week for just half days just to help me. And we had talked about her before we started this podcast, but she has become one of my best friends. So I got support and I got help. And she just... if you want to go into my day to day, basically I just went into this enormous period of time of just decluttering, organizing, simplifying, control. What can I control? And getting my life back to a place where I could manage it. And that's what I did that first fall after cancer happened. And that was probably one of the harder times emotionally. After the initial diagnosis, that was actually in some ways emotionally harder than the actual active cancer treatment because like I said, you kind of go into fight or flight. You shelf everything. You're not, you're not processing anything. So then you go home and the reality of what has happened starts hitting, right? And I start seeing the behaviors in my kids that, whether it is related to what we've gone through or not, it's your brain kind of tags meaning to it of oh, my child is struggling in this way. That's because of this life turn and you carry this weight and you carry this guilt and there's so much emotionally and I'm still not really okay with the Down syndrome. I'm better, but I'm still sad a lot and processing a lot and trying to understand and cope with it and figure out how this is how I'm lucky, right? The lucky few. I'm still trying to understand okay, I'm lucky. How am I really truly lucky, right? And then I ended up getting to a point where I think I just needed to really get away from Utah because, like I said, our story started when we moved to Utah.
Right. That is right.
And so everything for me is so tied to this move. So I decided to just take my kids, we homeschool, take my kids and go be with my sister. It was supposed to be a 2-week trip, but it turned into a 3-month trip. And that's what I did. I guess I just ran away. And I know so many people do not have that option. That's not helpful information for other people processing hard stuff in life because that's not a reality most can do. But because of how we've set our life up, it's why we homeschool. So we have that freedom to travel. So I took advantage of that. And I went and I lived with a sister who lives in warmer weather near the ocean. And I canceled all the therapies. I canceled all the doctor's appointments that I could. We checked with Rosie's doctors to make sure it was safe and got myself a chunk of time where we could just go and be human and heal and not drown in so much. And it was incredible. It was very healing and very connecting. And that's where I truly was able to really heal my relationship and my connection to Rosie. And I just fell so in love with her so hard for her. I just like, I can't explain it. I don't have words for that. It is once you have, and I think part of that is because of what you go through. It's so hard that when the connection and that love come back and you reattach, it's a bond like nothing else.
That is beautiful.
So
Trying to piece the time frame on this. What months were you away?
I think I left February, like right after Valentine's Day. It was supposed to be for 2 weeks. And then I talked my husband into coming to us instead of us coming home. And I think did he? Oh no, he came with us. I think it was a trip we all went on. And then he went home and I stayed. And then he came back. I was able to talk him to come back so we weren't apart for too long. And he's always been really, really good about that and letting me kind of have that freedom. So we were there. It was after her birthday because we celebrated her first birthday in Alabama. And that's when my husband came to visit. So he was kind of there around that time period. And then I think we went home at the end of April that I would have gone back. So it was like 2 to 3 months, maybe 2 months.
I have not met Ryan, and I don't know really much about him other than what I'm hearing right now, but Ryan seems like a pretty awesome guy.
Yeah, I could write a book on how my husband responded to my grief. He was grieving too. I mean, his grief was equally matched, but he was my rock. We are actually pretty independent of each other. And for those before the cancer hit, those first 2 to 3 weeks, I was struggling to not be in the same room as him, right? Like if he would leave the room, I felt like I was going to have a panic attack, basically. He was the only person that knew what I was going through. It's a very isolating experience. You feel like the world stops and everyone else moves on and no one can relate to you anymore. You feel like you can't relate to your friends. You can't relate to your family. They don't understand what's going on. So many times, like I would explain to a family member what was going through my mind and they would say, I never even thought about that. I never even thought about that. And I'm like, yeah, there's so many layers here to this diagnosis that most people don't stop and think about, right? Of how it impacts life and their life and your children's lives. And so he was wonderful. And he's the reason I think I'm able to be so vulnerable now. He came to me and of course I'm telling him all my thoughts that feel just like full of darkness and wrong. And as a mother, the thoughts that you should just never have and feel surrounding your baby and your child. And you feel like a monster, right? You feel like there's something wrong with me. And he's the one that was like, I read this in a book. It's normal. These thoughts are normal. This response is normal. There's nothing wrong with you. You do not need to feel guilty on top of everything else. And he just held me. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And he would find me in our closet. I would be on the floor crying. And he'd come in and he'd pick me up and just hold me and let me cry. And he just allowed it all. He just made space. He didn't try to fix it or change it. I mean, I'm telling you, I could literally write a book on how he responded. It was pretty beautiful.
That's very confirming to hear how you describe Ryan, because that's exactly the picture and what I had in my mind as you were sharing your story. So, Ryan, when you listen to this, good job. You're a great example. So let's talk about right now. If anybody is following Rachel on her Instagram, which I highly encourage it because Rosie is a doll and so full of personality. Talk to us about right now. I mean, and maybe let me set this up even a little more. We're talking about a very short period of time that has transpired. This is not years and years. This is April of 2023 to present, which is December of 24. And so how are you right now?
I'm good. I truly am good. She elicited a lot of growth very quickly in our lives, all of our lives, my children, my husband, myself. And while we are different people coming out of it, and we are trying to adjust to these new versions of ourselves and navigating that, right? But overall, when it comes especially to our relationship to Rosie and her existing in our life, I could not feel it. I get tingly when I talk about it. I literally feel this physical sensation of just gratitude, and I am so lucky. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how we got to be one of the families that have a child like Rosie. I don't understand what I did to deserve that. I didn't. And I often will say, Rosie's here to raise me. And I think that's what it is. I think I just needed her. She's here to raise me, and there is such depth and wisdom in her soul. It's so interesting. I think before having her, I think I used to have this subconscious belief that families in my shoes would say these things to make themselves feel better. I would never say that. That was never a conscious thought.
Of course.
But you always feel bad, right? You always are kind of like, oh, but I feel bad for you, right? Like, that looks hard. And now that I'm in those shoes, I'm like, yeah, some days are hard, but so is raising my other two kids. I've watched plenty of adult parents with adult children navigating those years of their lives, right? Because that's the thing I think that we mostly all fear is like the later years.
Sure.
Is the big one. And I'm like, they have hard stuff too, right? Like, just because my child has a disability doesn't mean that it's going to be any harder. It might be more beautiful in a lot of ways. It already is.
So you have 3 children. We talked a little bit before the podcast about reactions of individuals as you talk about having another child. And what's that question that they would ask you often?
My kids?
No, when people would say if you are planning on having another child and your thoughts about that.
Yes. So at the beginning, I'm telling you, like, days postpartum, I'm telling my husband, I have to have another baby, like, now, right? Like, you think you can just kind of redo. And especially I wanted to just like have a different birth experience. I didn't want to end on something that felt so traumatizing. And it was always, the conversation was, yeah, but like, what if, right? Obviously, things can go wrong, and something did go wrong this time, right? That was the language at the beginning. And it was always, what if, right? What if it happens again? What if we end up with another child with a disability, with Down syndrome? And we were terrified of that, of having a fourth. And now I'm like, but what if? What if our fourth came and they were built just like Rosie and genetically just like Rosie, and it would be incredible and amazing. And yeah, it's totally switched. That feeling on that fear is gone.
It is fascinating to see how that transpires, because I remember with Nash, after Nash was born, we had Ridge a couple of years later, and that was a common thing that people would ask, like, hey, are you concerned about having another child with Down syndrome? And there's actually maybe some misconceptions around that like that the chances are high that you'll have another child with Down syndrome, when in reality they're not, right? But
Yeah.
I think there's a misconception. Same thing for us, to where we would tell people that would be amazing. We hate to say this, but we kind of hope that they do have Down syndrome, because there's pretty dang cool things about that. And
yes.
Earlier, what does the lucky few mean? And like, what is that exactly? And it's almost impossible to try and understand what that is when you're in the thick of that moment of diagnosis. But then being on the other side of it and having experienced Down syndrome in your life, we know firsthand what it means to be part of the lucky few. And this has been a very rewarding conversation for me, because one, thank you for being so transparent and so vulnerable. I think so many of our listeners, I know for myself and I know for Andrea, as we would listen to this, that we resonate a lot with what you said. And we did not have the cancer diagnosis after. I can't even imagine that, but we resonate so much with what you are sharing. And I'm positive that many of our listeners feel that same way as well. But now it's a point where it's like, let this girl run. And so one of your posts that you said, I think it was to Rosie, everything's a race, as she was running with her walker. And you can just see that look of determination in her eye, that she has her eye on the prize. And this girl is going places. She has some songs that she's going to be singing for sure.
Yeah. Greatest honor of my life will be witnessing what she does and getting a front row seat. Like, I just still can't believe I'm just get to watch it. It'll be the greatest honor of my life, truly.
Definitely. Rachel, thank you for being a guest on the show. You've been an incredible guest. Thank you for what you're doing for our community. Thank you for your support of Rod's Heroes and the work that we're doing there as well. And we just wish you guys the very, very best.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. You guys are the best over there. And hopefully soon we'll get to meet in real life. That would be awesome.
Most definitely. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conquering Your Clownfish. If you liked what we discussed on the podcast today and want to continue the conversation, please visit us at conqueringyourclownfish.com. And please don't forget to subscribe.